Big breaking news just in. The April jobs report is out, and it's a huge disappointment and frankly a shock. Just 266,000 jobs were added last month. Yes, that's added, but economists were expecting about 1 million jobs to have been added in the month. Unemployment remained little changed at 6.1%. This is the slowest improvement for jobs since January. Also, black men and women and Hispanics continuing to feel the brunt of the pandemic layoffs.
All of this despite more vaccinations. The hope had been more people getting vaccinated. They're going out, and more businesses reopening and also staffing up. We have live coverage of the breaking news. The president is set to speak soon in response to this. Let's begin, though, with Christine Romans. Christine, it's not often that economists, and these are private economists and government economists, to get a forecast like this so off. What happened here?
A major disappointment. What happened was a year ago this month, 20 million jobs vanished out of the labor market. We shut the economy down, and turning it back on, there is no playbook. There is no blueprint for how to do this. And we saw companies hire much fewer workers than we had expected, and we saw the unemployment rate actually tick up. That 266,000 number, Poppy's right to point out that's the slowest since January, and far fewer jobs added back than we had expected. What we've been hearing from different parts of the economy, especially in leisure and hospitality and in manufacturing, is they can't find the workers. Now, 331,000 leisure and hospitality jobs were added in the month. So those reopenings are resulting in hiring there, but not as many as we had thought here. And I think, guys, there's probably three things at play here. You still have, thousands of people contracting the virus every single day. You have schools still closed and a lack of child care, and you have unemployment benefits at $300 extra a week that last until the fall. There's not a lot of incentive for some folks to come back into the labor market at this point in the middle of a pandemic where there's a health and safety risk and your kids aren't in school yet, right? So there are still some big distortions in the economy that need to be worked out.
Yeah. Okay, so Jeremy, if you're sitting in the House, the White House behind you right now this morning, I think you're thinking two things. Three things. We're surprised at this number, but hey, this gives us a lot more ammunition to call for the $6 trillion in spending we want. But what about states like Montana and South Carolina that are saying we're going to stop those extended federal unemployment benefits to get people back to work? I mean, economists at Jefferies just a few minutes ago say this: outside of the possibility that employers are unable to find people willing to work to fill the positions, the weakness is totally baffling. Nothing in the lead up to today suggested we would see this weak a number.
Yeah, listen, there are a lot of dynamics at play. One thing that is certain, though, is that President Biden's remarks this morning are going to be different than what perhaps they would have been had those economist projections been correct. We've heard the president over the last couple of weeks beating back these fears about inflation, pushing back on Republican arguments that we've already spent $1.9 trillion on this coronavirus relief, another $4 trillion for his American Jobs Plan and American Families Plan could lead to the economy overheating and frankly just isn't needed, is the argument that a lot of Republicans have been making. Now the president is able to make perhaps a different case today, making the case that yes, the $1.9 trillion in coronavirus relief has helped the economy recover. Jobs are still gaining back. More jobs are still being added. But at the same time, he can now say more stimulus is still needed. And in particular, focusing on that infrastructure proposal that he has, which we have heard him frame repeatedly in the sense of these blue collar jobs that can be created. And that is certainly something that I think we can expect to hear from the president once again this morning.
So, Christine Romans, that's what the president's going to say. Let's be clear. The president and the White House were expecting a victory lap on these numbers. They're not going to get it. So they'll argue for more money. We need it. You're already hearing from Republicans, and I'll bet you $5 you're going to hear more from them today saying, well, there's no incentive to go back to work because there's too much unemployment insurance, et cetera. Chrissy, what does the data tell us, right?
I mean, the data
about which of those forces is real?
The data tells us there's a huge mismatch in the American labor market right now, that you have factories that have 500,000 jobs are available in American factories, but they can't find the work there. We know that we're looking for truck drivers, for gasoline, for tanker trucks, and that's the coronavirus that dislocated that. All of a sudden, the economy shut down. You didn't need all of this gas moving around the country. Those workers were laid off, and now they've gone to do something else. They're maybe working in a different part of the transportation industry. So the coronavirus coronavirus recession so scarred the American economy. It was so just nuclear that we're having trouble getting all the pieces back in for everyone on this side of it.
Well, one of the problems, Christine, it's just the way the numbers are calculated, as you know, is that anyone who stopped looking for work doesn't even get counted in these numbers. So on women, I mean, the top line numbers here for women aren't all that bad, but that's because so many aren't being counted because they're home taking care of their kids, right?
Yeah, and we know that more than 2 million women have dropped out of the labor market, and we know that there's something like 4 or 5 million fewer jobs for women, and that tells you that women were working 2 jobs, many of them, right? Not just 1 job. So the labor force, the labor market damage for women, a generation of progress for women in the workforce essentially wiped out by a global pandemic, by a pandemic in this country. So there's a lot of work to do there. And I think that's where you'll see the White House try to tie into its human capital, its infrastructure push, human worker infrastructure to make that point that you can't just turn the switch back on, everybody goes back to the way it was, that women in particular and families need supports in the labor market to come back. I mean, so many schools are still closed. I mean, I think my middle schooler is going to go actually set foot in a school 5 times by the end of the year because of the way it's hybrid. How difficult for somebody to go back to a job or even start looking again when you've got, you know, those kinds of challenges in the family. That's something really to think about as we go forward here with opening. Hopefully that'll get easier in the fall, I hope.
And that's why, as we've heard these Republicans make the arguments about the labor supply and talking about the fact that these unemployment benefits are disincentivizing people from returning to the labor force, we've heard the White House instead focus on these disruptions to schooling, on these disruptions to childcare, which only helps them bolster their case for this American Families Plan and the kind of social infrastructure that they say is needed in this country.
Labor Secretary Marty Walsh is with me now. Mr. Secretary, thank you. Good morning.
Thank you for having me today.
Why such a disappointment?
It's actually kind of funny when we're talking about 266,000 jobs added to the economy. It's a disappointment. You know, we're seeing that our economy is still growing and we're still recovering. If you look at the 3-month average here in this country, over 500,000 jobs added every single month. And we're going in the right direction. I think that people have anticipated that numbers were going to be in the 1 million, 2 million, but the reality of the situation is we're still very much in the midst of the pandemic, but we are seeing many areas recover. One very bright spot of this recovery today was the leisure and hospitality industry, which includes restaurants, added the most amount of jobs, and that's a very good sign because those areas were hit the hardest all across America.
Except, I mean, I don't have to tell you what restaurant owners and operators are seeing. They are having an incredibly hard time getting people to come back to work. Listen to one right here in New York City.
We have no staff to open for lunch at all. Normally you get at least 30, 40, 50 people, 60 people, depending on how the economy is doing. We only had 3 people respond to our ads, and none of them showed up. We're supposed to go hire people to retain them, but at the same time you're paying unemployment. It creates a conflict of interest, so to speak.
They think people aren't coming back to work because they're getting the extra federal unemployment benefits. Do you think that's the case?
No, I don't necessarily think that's the case. I think that there are definitely barriers to people coming back to work. There's lots of issues around childcare. There's still many of our kids are still in school in a hybrid model. Some are in person, some are learning remotely. We also have people have concerns about the virus. As we get more and more people vaccinated, that's a good sign. There's still people concerned about it. But one bright side also in this report for the month of April is that we saw more people looking for work in the month of April than the previous months as far as the pandemic goes. So I know that there's lots of concerns as we move forward here, but I do think that as we continue to move down this road, we will see more people come back into all the different industries.
I mean, you really don't think, I hear you, and all those things can be true at the same time. Child care issues, big problem, especially for women. COVID concerns, I get it. But you really don't think it's a contributing factor at all? I mean, you have Montana and South Carolina overnight saying they are not going to take, after the month of June, these federal increased unemployment benefits in order to incentivize people to get back to work. Are they wrong?
Well, one of the things about Montana is the unemployment rate is 3.6%, and you look around the country, we're still at 6%, 6.1% unemployment rate. You look in communities of color, that's 9.7% in the black community. So there is still concerns out there, and the virus is still very much with us. We're dealing with it, as you know this. I mean, we've talked about it many times. We're dealing with a pandemic that has had severe consequences on people. So I think as we move forward here, I think we'll start to see more and more people get back into the workforce and start to go into those jobs. And I've heard those same questions and some same concerns from restaurant owners about people wanting to go back in. But what we need to do also is make sure that we raise wages as well, so that people have incentives to go back to work.